The sting of her hand across my face echoed through my own living room like a gunshot. For a moment, I couldn't process what had just happened. My daughter-in-law Jessica stood there, her face twisted with rage, her manicured hand still raised from the slap that had just sent my 70-year-old head snapping to the side. "Don't you ever tell me what I can and can't do in this house again, old woman," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom I'd never heard before. "I decide who comes and goes here, not you." I touched my burning cheek, staring at this woman I had welcomed into my family 3 years ago, this woman I had trusted with my grandchildren, this woman who had just physically assaulted me in the home I had lived in for 42 years. The home my late husband Robert and I had built together. The home where I had raised my son David. The home that was legally, unquestionably mine. But as I stood there in my own foyer, my face throbbing from her slap, I realized that legal ownership meant nothing when you were dealing with someone who had systematically convinced your own son that you were the enemy. My name is Margaret Thompson. I am 70 years old, and until that moment, I had never been struck by another human being in my entire life. Not by my parents, not by my husband, not by strangers on the street. The first person to ever lay a violent hand on me was the woman my son had married, the woman who was supposed to be part of my family. The slap came after what should have been a simple conversation about my longtime friend Eleanor visiting for Sunday dinner. Eleanor Winters had been my closest friend for over 30 years. We had worked together at the telephone company, raised our children in the same neighborhood, and supported each other through the deaths of our husbands. She was more like a sister to me than a friend, and she had been having Sunday dinner at my house on the first weekend of every month for the past decade. "Jessica," I had said that morning, "Eleanor will be joining us for dinner today. I thought I'd make pot roast." The change in Jessica's demeanor was instant and terrifying. Her face darkened, and her voice took on that cold tone I had been hearing more and more frequently over the past few months. "No, she won't," Jessica replied flatly. "I don't want that woman in my house." I blinked, certain I had misheard. "Excuse me. You heard me. Eleanor is not welcome here anymore. I'm tired of you inviting people over without asking my permission first." The absurdity of the statement left me momentarily speechless. This was my house. My name was on the deed. My mortgage payments had built the equity. My decorating choices filled every room. Yet my daughter-in-law was talking about it as if it belonged to her. "Jessica, this is my home. I don't need permission to invite my friends for dinner." That's when she slapped me. The force of it knocked me off balance, and I had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling. The shock was even worse than the pain. In all my years, through all the difficulties life had thrown at me, I had never experienced such casual, deliberate violence from someone who was supposed to love me. "It's my house now," Jessica said, her voice deadly calm. "I live here. My children live here. My husband lives here. You're just the old woman we're stuck taking care of. So when I say someone isn't welcome, they're not welcome." I stared at her, my hand still pressed to my burning cheek, trying to understand how my life had arrived at this moment. 3 years ago, Jessica had been the sweet, attentive woman who had captured my son's heart. She had been respectful, helpful, and seemingly devoted to family. She had moved into my house after their wedding with promises of taking care of me as I aged, of being the daughter I'd never had, of creating a beautiful multi-generational home filled with love and support. Instead, she had systematically taken over every aspect of my daily life, turning me into a prisoner in my own home. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been a gradual process, so subtle that I hadn't recognized it for what it was until it was too late. It started with small suggestions about how things could be organized better, how the house could run more efficiently if she handled certain responsibilities. She offered to take over the grocery shopping because she was already out running errands. She suggested handling the household bills because she was good with computers and could set up automatic payments. She volunteered to manage the social calendar because she wanted to make sure we weren't overwhelming ourselves with too many commitments. One by one, she had taken control of every aspect of my independence, and I had let her do it because I thought she was trying to help. The first red flag should have been how she started limiting my contact with friends and neighbors. It began with seemingly reasonable explanations. Eleanor couldn't come to dinner one week because Jessica had planned a special family night. My neighbor Mrs. Patterson couldn't visit because Jessica was deep cleaning the house. My book club meetings became inconvenient because Jessica needed help with the children. Gradually, my social connections began to fade. Friends stopped calling because I was never available. Neighbors stopped dropping by because they were made to feel unwelcome. Family gatherings became tense affairs where Jessica dominated the conversation and made subtle digs about older people who didn't understand how modern families worked. The second red flag was how she began controlling my finances. It started when she offered to help me understand online banking and bill paying. She convinced me that having her name on my accounts would make things easier in case of emergencies. She suggested that consolidating our household expenses would be more efficient and economical. Before I knew it, Jessica had access to all of my accounts and was making financial decisions without consulting me. When I tried to question certain expenditures, she would show me complicated spreadsheets that supposedly proved how much money her management was saving me. When I asked for my own bank statements, she would delay producing them, claiming she was still organizing the paperwork. The third red flag was how she turned my son against me. David had always been a devoted son, calling regularly, visiting often, and including me in important decisions about his life. But gradually, Jessica began poisoning him against me with a steady stream of complaints about my behavior. According to Jessica, I was too demanding, too set in my ways, too critical of her parenting, too negative about their marriage. She convinced David that I was having trouble adjusting to not being the only woman in his life, that I was jealous of their relationship, that I was becoming difficult and unreasonable as I aged. David, who loved both of us and wanted peace in his home, began taking Jessica's side in conflicts. He started treating me with the patronizing patience one reserves for a difficult child rather than the respect due to a mother and homeowner. He would listen to my complaints about Jessica's behavior with visible annoyance, dismissing them as misunderstandings or overreactions. The fourth red flag was how she began treating my grandchildren. Emma was 8 and Jake was 5 when Jessica married David. They had been excited about having a new mommy, and I had been thrilled that they would grow up in a stable, loving home. But Jessica's version of stability involved strict control and harsh punishment for any behavior that didn't meet her standards. The children became quiet and anxious, walking on eggshells around their stepmother. When they came to me for comfort, Jessica would accuse me of undermining her authority and turning the children against her. Gradually, she limited my time with Emma and Jake, claiming they needed more structure and routine. She began scheduling their activities during times when I would normally spend time with them. She convinced David that I was spoiling them and making her job as their mother more difficult. The breaking point had been building for months, but it finally came to a head last week when I overheard a phone conversation that revealed the true scope of Jessica's manipulation. She was talking to her sister in the kitchen, her voice carrying clearly to the living room where I was pretending to watch television. "It's working perfectly, Sarah," she laughed. "The old bat has signed over everything. The house will be ours free and clear within the year." "What about David? Doesn't he suspect anything?" "David doesn't suspect a thing. He thinks I'm being a devoted wife, taking care of his aging mother. He has no idea that every document I've had her sign is transferring ownership to us. By the time she realizes what's happened, it'll be too late to stop it. And what happens to her then? That's not my problem. She can go to one of those senior living places. All I care about is getting her out of my house and getting my hands on her assets." The casual cruelty in her voice was matched only by the calculated nature of her plan. I wasn't family to her. I wasn't even a person. I was just an obstacle standing between her and the financial security she craved. I had sat there in my own living room, listening to this woman discuss my future as if I were a piece of furniture to be disposed of, and finally understood that everything I had suspected was true. Jessica hadn't married David for love. She had married him to gain access to my home and my assets. That night, I had tried to talk to David about what I had overheard, but Jessica had anticipated my move. Before I could get him alone, she had already planted seeds about my increasing paranoia and confusion about financial matters. "Mom," David had said with that patronizing tone I had come to hate, "Jessica told me you've been making some concerning statements about money and property. She's worried that you might be having some cognitive issues." The implicit threat was crystal clear. If I continued to cause problems, Jessica would have me declared mentally incompetent. I would lose not just my home and my money, but also my freedom and my relationship with my grandchildren. For a week, I had lived with this knowledge, trying to figure out what to do, how to protect myself, how to save my son from the predator he had married. I consulted with a lawyer, but the documents I had signed were legally binding, even if I hadn't fully understood their implications at the time. I contacted Adult Protective Services, but without clear evidence of abuse, they could only offer resources and support. I tried to reach out to old friends, but months of isolation had damaged those relationships. The morning of the slap, I had made a decision. I was going to start fighting back, one small step at a time. I was going to reclaim my independence, my dignity, and my home. The Sunday dinner invitation to Eleanor was my first act of rebellion. I had underestimated how violently Jessica would react to any challenge to her control. Standing there with my cheek burning from her assault, I realized that I had reached a point of no return. Jessica had shown her true nature, and there was no going back to the pretense of a happy family living in harmony. "If you ever touch me again," I said, my voice shaking but determined, "I will call the police and have you arrested for assault." Jessica laughed, a cold sound that chilled me to the bone. "Go ahead and call them, Margaret. Tell them your devoted daughter-in-law slapped you because you're having delusions about ownership of property that legally belongs to her and her husband. Tell them you're making wild accusations about financial abuse that you can't prove. See how far that gets you." She was right, and we both knew it. The documents I had signed gave her legal standing. Her position as my caregiver gave her credibility. My age made any accusations I leveled seem potentially unreliable. But she had made one critical mistake. She had gotten physical. And unlike financial abuse or emotional manipulation, physical assault left evidence. I walked to the bathroom and took photos of my face with my phone, documenting the handprint that was already forming on my cheek. I wrote down everything she had said, noting the time and date. I gathered the business cards the lawyer had given me and the contact information for Adult Protective Services. Jessica had escalated the conflict beyond manipulation and psychological abuse. She had committed a crime, and that crime might be the opening I needed to expose everything else she had done. When David came home from work that evening, I was waiting for him in the living room. The handprint on my face was clearly visible, and I had prepared everything I needed to make my case. "David, we need to talk," I said as he walked through the door. Jessica immediately appeared from the kitchen, her demeanor completely transformed from the cold predator who had assaulted me that morning. She was now the concerned, loving wife who was worried about her husband's difficult mother. "David, honey, I'm so glad you're home," she said, rushing to his side. "Your mother had a really bad episode today. I'm worried that she might need professional help." David looked at my bruised face with confusion and concern. "Mom, what happened to your face?" "Your wife slapped me because I told her she couldn't prevent my friends from visiting my own house." The transformation in Jessica's expression was swift and practiced. Her face crumpled with apparent distress, and tears began flowing down her cheeks. "David, she's having delusions again. She's been making these wild accusations all week. This morning she became violent when I tried to calm her down. I had to defend myself when she tried to attack me." I watched my son's face as he processed these competing versions of reality. For a moment, I thought he might actually believe me. But Jessica's performance was masterful, and she had been laying the groundwork for this moment for weeks. "Mom," David said carefully, "maybe we should talk to Dr. Harrison about adjusting your medications. This kind of confusion and paranoia can be a side effect of some of the drugs you're taking." The betrayal was complete. My own son was choosing to believe that his elderly mother had become violent and delusional rather than accept that his wife was a calculating predator. "David," I said, my voice steady despite my breaking heart, "I need you to look at my face and tell me honestly what you see." He looked, and I could see the moment when he registered the clear handprint on my cheek. But Jessica was ready for this too. "She did that to herself," Jessica said through her fake tears. She was so agitated, she was hitting herself and throwing things. I tried to stop her, but she's stronger than she looks. The lie was so outrageous, so completely divorced from reality, that for a moment I was speechless. But David's expression told me that he wanted to believe her. It was easier for him to think his mother was having mental health issues than to confront the possibility that his wife was an abuser. "Mom," he said gently, "why don't you go rest in your room? Jessica and I need to talk about getting you some help." The dismissal was devastating, but it also clarified my situation completely. I was alone in this fight. My son had chosen his wife over the truth, over his mother, over basic human decency. That night, I lay in my bed listening to David and Jessica discuss my future in hushed tones in the hallway. They were making plans to have me evaluated by a psychiatrist, possibly committed to a facility for my own safety and the safety of others. Jessica's plan was working perfectly. She had successfully isolated me, gained control of my assets, turned my family against me, and now she was preparing to have me removed entirely. But she had underestimated the fury of a woman who had finally realized she had nothing left to lose. The next morning, I called Eleanor and told her everything. My friend listened in horrified silence as I recounted the months of manipulation, the financial abuse, and finally the physical assault. "Margaret, you have to get out of that house," she said immediately. "Come stay with me while we figure out how to fight this." "I can't leave, Eleanor. If I leave, she wins completely. The house becomes hers, the children become hers, and David never learns the truth about what kind of woman he married. Then what are you going to do?" I thought about it for a moment, feeling a strength I hadn't experienced in months rising within me. "I'm going to make her show her true face to everyone. I'm going to force her to drop the mask in front of witnesses who can't be manipulated or dismissed." The plan I hatched was simple but risky. I would invite several people to the house for what appeared to be a normal social gathering. Eleanor, my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, my pastor's wife Helen, and my nephew Mark, who was a police officer in the next county. I would create a situation where Jessica felt compelled to assert her control in front of people who knew me well and could testify to what they witnessed. I told each of them a different story about why I needed their support, but I made sure they all understood that something serious was happening in my home and that I needed witnesses to document it. The gathering was planned for the following Saturday afternoon. I told David and Jessica that I was having a small get-together with friends, framing it as a social event rather than the intervention it actually was. Jessica's reaction was immediate and predictable. She told me the gathering was cancelled, that she had made other plans for the family, that entertaining was too much stress for someone in my condition. When I insisted that the gathering would proceed as planned, she escalated to threats about having me committed if I continued to act irrationally. But this time, I was ready for her. Saturday arrived gray and cold, but I felt more energized than I had in months. My witnesses began arriving at 2 o'clock, and I made sure to greet each of them warmly and publicly, establishing my role as the hostess in my own home. Eleanor arrived first, bringing homemade cookies and a bright smile that immediately lifted my spirits. Mrs. Patterson came next, followed by Helen and finally Mark, whose presence as a law enforcement officer I hoped would keep Jessica from becoming physically violent. Jessica watched from the kitchen as my guests settled into the living room, her face a mask of barely contained fury. David was upstairs with the children, avoiding the conflict he sensed was coming. For the first hour, everything proceeded normally. We talked about neighborhood news, shared stories about our families, and enjoyed the refreshments I had prepared. Jessica remained in the kitchen, loudly cleaning dishes and making it clear through her body language that she disapproved of the gathering. Then Eleanor made the comment I had been waiting for. "Margaret, you've seemed so much happier lately. It's wonderful to see you entertaining again. Your home has always been such a warm, welcoming place." The emphasis on "your home" was deliberate, and Jessica heard it clearly. She appeared in the living room doorway, her fake smile firmly in place but her eyes cold with anger. "Actually," she said in a voice that carried to every corner of the room, "this is my home now. Margaret is just a guest here, and sometimes she forgets that fact." The silence that followed was deafening. My guests looked at each other with confusion and discomfort, not sure how to respond to such an inappropriate statement. Eleanor, bless her heart, rose to the occasion. "I'm sorry, Jessica, but I think there's been some confusion. Margaret has owned this house for over 40 years. She raised David here. This is definitely her home." Jessica's mask slipped completely. "Margaret doesn't own anything anymore," she snapped. "Everything she had belongs to David and me now. She signed it all over because she's too old and confused to manage her own affairs." Mrs. Patterson gasped audibly. Helen's eyes widened with shock. Mark, trained to recognize criminal behavior, was taking mental notes of everything Jessica was saying. I seized the moment. "Jessica, that's not true and you know it. You manipulated me into signing documents I didn't fully understand. You've been systematically stealing my money and planning to force me out of my own home." That's when Jessica lost control completely. "You ungrateful old witch," she screamed, advancing toward my chair. "After everything I've done for you, all the ways I've taken care of you, this is how you repay me? By spreading lies and trying to turn people against me." She raised her hand as if to slap me again, but Mark was on his feet instantly. "Ma'am, I need you to step back and calm down," he said in his authoritative police voice. "If you're feeling upset, maybe you should take a few minutes to cool off in another room." Jessica whirled on him, her face twisted with rage. "Don't you dare tell me what to do in my own house. You have no right to be here, none of you do. Margaret invited you here without my permission, and I want you all to leave immediately." Eleanor stood up, her own anger finally showing. "Jessica, we've known Margaret for decades. We've been coming to this house for years. You have no right to tell us we're not welcome in our friend's home. It's not her home." Jessica shrieked. "It's mine. Everything here is mine. She's just a senile old woman who doesn't understand reality anymore." The outburst was everything I had hoped for. In front of 4 reliable witnesses, Jessica had revealed her true nature and her actual relationship to me and my property. Her claims of ownership, her dismissal of my mental capacity, her threats of violence, all of it was now documented in the minds of people who could not be dismissed or manipulated. David appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by the shouting. His face was pale as he took in the scene, his wife screaming at his mother's guests, his mother sitting calmly in her chair, and his cousin Mark standing protectively nearby. "What's going on down there?" he called out. Jessica immediately shifted back into victim mode. "David, your mother has had another episode. She invited all these people here without asking me, and when I tried to explain that we had other plans, she became belligerent and turned them against me. But this time, she had witnesses who knew better." "That's not what happened," Eleanor said firmly. "Jessica told us this was her house and that Margaret was just a guest here. She said Margaret had signed everything over and was too old and confused to manage her own affairs. Then she tried to order us to leave." Mark stepped forward. "David, I'm here as Margaret's nephew, but I'm also a police officer, and I have to tell you that what I witnessed here today raises some serious concerns about elder abuse." The words, elder abuse, seemed to hit David like a physical blow. He came down the stairs slowly, his eyes moving from Jessica to me to the assembled witnesses. Mom, is this true? Has she been hurting you? The moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. My son was asking me directly, in front of witnesses, about what had been happening in this house. This was my chance to tell the truth and be believed. David, your wife slapped me across the face yesterday because I told her she couldn't prevent my friends from visiting my home. She has been systematically taking control of my finances, isolating me from my friends, and planning to have me committed so she can take complete ownership of my house and assets. Jessica immediately went into damage control mode. David, you know that's not true. Your mother has been having these paranoid episodes for weeks. Yesterday she became violent and I had to restrain her. I would never hurt her. Everything I've done has been to take care of her and protect this family. But Mark was looking at my face with professional interest. Margaret, you said she slapped you yesterday. Do you still have any marks or bruising? I had been hoping someone would ask. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I had taken immediately after the assault. I documented the injury and wrote down everything she said at the time. Mark examined the photos carefully, then looked at my face where the faint outline of a handprint was still visible. David, these photos show clear evidence of assault. The pattern and position of the bruising is consistent with a slap from someone standing in front of your mother. Jessica was now trapped between her lies and the evidence. Her face cycled through several expressions before settling on desperate anger. Those photos are fake. She could have done that to herself. Old people bruise easily, it could have happened any number of ways. But her protests were becoming increasingly hysterical, and everyone in the room could see the difference between her demeanor and mine. Eleanor spoke into the silence. Margaret, why don't you tell David about the phone conversation you overheard? I recounted the conversation between Jessica and her sister, repeating word for word Jessica's casual discussion of her plans to take ownership of my house and dispose of me in a senior facility. She called me the old bat and said that by the time I realized what was happening, it would be too late to stop it. David's face had gone completely white. He was staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. Jessica, please tell me this isn't true. Please tell me you haven't been manipulating my mother and stealing from her. For a moment, I thought Jessica might continue to deny everything. But she looked around the room at the faces of people who now knew exactly what she was, and something in her snapped. Fine, she screamed. Yes, I married you to get access to this house and her money. Yes, I've been moving her assets into accounts I control. Yes, I was planning to have her declared incompetent and committed. And yes, I slapped her when she tried to interfere with my plans. The confession was more complete than I had dared to hope for. In her rage and desperation, Jessica had admitted to every aspect of her scheme in front of multiple witnesses, including a police officer. David sank into a chair, his head in his hands. How could you do this? How could you use me to hurt my own mother? Jessica's brief moment of honesty was over, replaced by self-justification and blame. Because you were too weak to handle the situation yourself. Your mother was living in this big house all alone, hoarding money while you struggled to make ends meet. Someone had to take charge and make the hard decisions. I did what needed to be done for our family. By committing fraud and elder abuse, Mark said quietly. Ma'am, I need to inform you that based on what I've witnessed and heard today, I'm required to file a report with Adult Protective Services and the local police department. The mention of official report seemed to shake Jessica out of her defiant mood. She looked around the room with growing panic, perhaps finally realizing that her carefully constructed web of lies had completely unraveled. You can't prove anything, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's my word against hers, and everyone knows old people get confused and paranoid. Eleanor stood up, her voice ringing with authority. Actually, Jessica, it's your word against 5 witnesses who heard you confess to fraud, theft, and assault. And we all have excellent memories. Mrs. Patterson nodded firmly. I heard every word you said, dear. And I've known Margaret Thompson for 15 years. She's never been confused or paranoid about anything. Helen added her support. I've been Margaret's friend through our church for over a decade. Her mind is as sharp as anyone's I know. What you've described sounds like criminal behavior, not caregiving. Jessica looked at David with desperate eyes, perhaps hoping he would defend her one last time. But David was staring at her with a mixture of disgust and heartbreak that made it clear their marriage was over. I want you out of this house, he said quietly. I want you to pack your things and leave. Today. You can't throw me out. I have rights. I live here. Mark stepped forward again. Ma'am, this house belongs to Margaret Thompson. She has the right to decide who lives here and who doesn't. If she wants you to leave, you need to leave. Jessica turned to me with a look of pure hatred. This is all your fault, you spiteful old bitch. I was taking care of you, giving you a family, and this is how you repay me. The venom in her voice was shocking, but it was also liberating. Everyone in the room could now see exactly what I had been dealing with for months. Jessica, I said calmly, you were never taking care of me. You were stealing from me, manipulating my son, and planning to abandon me in an institution. The only person you've ever cared about is yourself. She opened her mouth to respond, but David cut her off. Get out, he said, his voice hollow but firm. Pack your clothes and get out of my mother's house. We'll deal with the legal issues later, but I don't want you here another minute. Jessica looked around the room one more time, perhaps hoping to find an ally or at least a sympathetic face. Instead, she found 5 people who had witnessed her complete moral collapse and knew exactly what kind of person she really was. Fine, she said, her voice cold with fury. But don't think this is over. I'll be back with a lawyer, and I'll fight for everything I'm entitled to. You're not entitled to anything, Mark said matter-of-factly. You're potentially facing criminal charges for elder abuse, fraud, and assault. I'd recommend focusing on finding a good defense attorney rather than fighting for assets you obtained through illegal means. The reality of her legal situation seemed to hit Jessica for the first time. Her face went pale, and she looked genuinely frightened. I need to make some phone calls, she said, backing toward the stairs. Make them from somewhere else, David replied. You have 1 hour to pack whatever clothes you need and leave. Everything else can be sorted out through lawyers. As Jessica stumbled up the stairs, my guests began to gather around me with expressions of concern and support. Margaret, are you all right? Eleanor asked, taking my hand. That was incredibly difficult to watch. I can't imagine how much worse it must have been to live through. I'm better than I've been in months, I replied honestly. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I have my life back. Mark was taking notes in a small notebook. Margaret, I need you to give me a detailed statement about everything that's happened. The financial manipulation, the isolation, the assault, all of it. I'm going to make sure this gets the attention it deserves from the proper authorities. David was sitting in his chair looking devastated. I went to him and put my hand on his shoulder. David, I know this is hard. I know you loved her and thought she loved you. But you need to understand that none of this is your fault. She manipulated you just as much as she manipulated me. He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have protected you instead of taking her side. You were trying to hold your family together. That's what good men do. You couldn't have known that she was lying about everything. We could hear Jessica upstairs, moving around frantically and talking on the phone in hushed, urgent tones. Within an hour, she had packed 2 large suitcases and was heading for the front door. She paused in the doorway to deliver one final threat. This isn't over, Margaret. I'll be back, and I'll make you pay for ruining my life. Mark stood up from where he had been writing his report. Ma'am, I'm going to strongly advise you not to make threats against a victim of elder abuse in front of a police officer. That could be considered intimidation of a witness, which is a separate criminal charge. Jessica glared at him, then at me, then at David. Without another word, she walked out of the house and slammed the door behind her. The silence that followed felt like the end of a storm. We could all feel the tension leaving the air as the source of poison was finally removed from my home. Eleanor broke the silence. Well, Margaret, I think this calls for a celebration. Why don't I make us all some tea? As my friends bustled around my kitchen, preparing refreshments and chatting quietly about what we had all witnessed, I sat in my living room feeling truly at peace for the first time in months. David came and sat beside me on the couch. Mom, what happens now? With the house, with the money she took, with everything? Mark looked up from his notes. I'll be filing reports with Adult Protective Services and the District Attorney's Office first thing Monday morning. They'll launch a full investigation into Jessica's activities. As for the financial issues, you'll need to work with an attorney who specializes in elder law and fraud recovery. But the documents she had me sign, are they still legally binding? That depends on whether you can prove you were coerced or misinformed about what you were signing. Given what we witnessed today, and the confession Jessica made, I think you have a strong case for having those documents voided. The relief I felt was overwhelming. For months, I had felt trapped and powerless, watching my life being stolen from me piece by piece. Now, finally, I had hoped that I could recover what had been taken and protect myself from future abuse. Over the next several weeks, the legal process moved forward with surprising speed. Jessica's confession in front of witnesses, combined with the photographic evidence of the assault and the financial records Mark helped me gather, created a strong case for prosecution. Adult Protective Services conducted a thorough investigation and concluded that I had been the victim of systematic financial and emotional abuse. The district attorney filed multiple criminal charges against Jessica, including elder fraud, identity theft, assault, and theft. The civil case to recover my assets was more complicated, but my attorney was optimistic. Several of the financial transactions Jessica had made could be challenged as fraudulent, especially the larger transfers that occurred after she had isolated me from independent legal advice. David filed for divorce immediately, and Jessica made no attempt to contest it. She was too busy trying to avoid prison to fight over property she had no legitimate claim to anyway. The most difficult part of the process was helping Emma and Jake understand why Jessica was no longer part of their lives. David and I worked together to explain the situation in age-appropriate terms, focusing on the fact that Jessica had made some very bad choices and needed to face the consequences. Is Grandma Margaret going to be okay? Emma asked one evening as I was tucking her into bed in the room she now occupied regularly during David's custody time. Grandma Margaret is going to be just fine, I assured her. Bad people tried to hurt her, but she's strong and she had good friends to help her. Now she's safe, and you're safe, and Daddy is safe. I'm glad you're not going away, Grandma. I was scared when Jessica said you might have to live somewhere else. The knowledge that Jessica had been preparing the children for my eventual removal was heartbreaking, but it also confirmed how carefully she had planned every aspect of her scheme. 6 months after that confrontational Saturday afternoon, Jessica pled guilty to multiple charges and was sentenced to 4 years in prison plus restitution. She was also ordered to pay for my legal fees and the costs associated with undoing the financial damage she had caused. We recovered about 80% of what she had stolen, which was more than my attorney had initially expected. More importantly, all of the property transfers were voided, and my home was legally and unquestionably mine again. David moved back into the house with Emma and Jake, and we began the slow process of rebuilding our relationships. The children were resilient, as children often are, but they needed time to process everything that had happened and to learn to trust again. I decided to use my experience to help others in similar situations. I started attending support groups for elder abuse victims and eventually began facilitating meetings myself. The stories I heard were heartbreakingly familiar: family members who exploited trust, manipulated finances, and used emotional blackmail to control elderly relatives. The hardest part, I would tell new group members, is accepting that someone you loved and trusted was capable of such deliberate cruelty. But once you accept that, you can start fighting back. One woman, Catherine, had a daughter who had convinced her to sell her condo and move into a studio apartment, pocketing the difference. Another man, Robert, had a son-in-law who had gradually taken control of his investment accounts and was slowly draining them to fund a gambling addiction. "How did you find the strength to fight back?" Catherine asked me during one meeting. "I feel so ashamed, like everyone must think I'm stupid for letting this happen." "Shame is their weapon," I replied. "They want you to feel stupid and helpless because that keeps you quiet. But you're not stupid. You're a loving parent who trusted family members and had that trust betrayed. There's no shame in that." Working with other victims gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't expected. Every person who found the courage to report abuse, every family that learned to set healthy boundaries, every elder who reclaimed their independence made my own ordeal feel worthwhile. David threw himself into making amends for the months when he had chosen Jessica's lies over my truth. He attended therapy to understand how he had been manipulated and to learn how to recognize similar patterns in the future. "Mom," he said one evening as we sat on the porch watching Emma and Jake play in the backyard, "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, all the times I should have questioned what Jessica was telling me about you. David, she's a professional manipulator. She knew exactly how to exploit your desire to keep peace in your family and your trust in your wife. You can't blame yourself for not seeing through someone whose entire life was built around deception. But I should have trusted you. You're my mother. You've never lied to me. And Jessica was your wife. You thought she loved you and the children. It's natural that you wanted to believe her." The healing process wasn't linear. There were setbacks and difficult conversations. Emma sometimes asked when Jessica was coming back, not understanding that someone who had seemed to love her had actually been using her as a tool for manipulation. Jake had nightmares about loud voices and people being angry. But gradually, our family found its new normal. Sunday dinners became joyful occasions again, with Eleanor and other friends joining us regularly. The house filled with laughter instead of tension. The children began to relax and act like children instead of walking on eggshells. 1 year after Jessica's sentencing, I received a letter from her in prison. Unlike her previous communications, which had been full of threats and blame, this one seemed different. "Margaret," she wrote, "I know that nothing I can say will undo the damage I caused to you and your family. I've had a lot of time to think about my actions, and I'm beginning to understand how much pain I caused people who tried to love me. I'm not asking for forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I realize now how wrong I was." I showed the letter to David, who read it with a mixture of sadness and skepticism. "Do you think she means it?" he asked. "I think she's learning that actions have consequences," I replied. "Whether she truly understands the harm she caused or is just saying what she thinks I want to hear, I don't know. But it doesn't matter to me anymore." "Are you going to write back?" "No. My healing doesn't depend on her acknowledgement or apology. I've moved beyond needing anything from her." 2 years after that terrible day when Jessica slapped me in my own home, I was invited to speak at a conference on elder abuse prevention. Standing at that podium, looking out at an audience of social workers, lawyers, and law enforcement officers, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't expected. "Elder abuse often begins with small boundary violations," I told the audience. "A family member who takes over bill paying without asking. A caregiver who restricts social contact. A child who pressures a parent to make financial decisions quickly, without independent advice. By the time the victim realizes what's happening, they may feel too isolated, ashamed, or frightened to ask for help. After my presentation, a young social worker approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Thompson, thank you for sharing your story. My grandmother is in a situation right now that sounds very similar to what you described. I've been worried about her, but I didn't know how to help. I gave her my contact information and the resources I had gathered over the years. Tell your grandmother that she's not alone, and that it's never too late to take back control of her life." 3 years after Jessica's arrest, Emma, now 11, came to me with a school project about family history. "Grandma Margaret, can you help me write about our family? I need to include some challenges we've overcome." I looked at this bright, resilient child who had survived her stepmother's manipulation and was growing up with a deep understanding of integrity and courage. "What would you like to say about the challenges, sweetheart?" "I want to say that our family learned that love doesn't mean letting people hurt you. And that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it's hard." Her words brought tears to my eyes. From the ashes of Jessica's betrayal, these children were learning lessons about strength, boundaries, and authentic love that would serve them for the rest of their lives. David had begun dating again, but very cautiously. He attended therapy regularly and had developed a much clearer understanding of healthy relationship patterns. "I'm terrified of making the same mistake again," he confided to me one evening. "That fear will actually protect you," I replied. "You know what manipulation looks like now. You know the warning signs. And most importantly, you know that anyone who truly loves you will respect your relationship with your family, not try to destroy it." 5 years after Jessica walked out of my house in handcuffs, I received news that she was being released on parole. The notification included information about restraining orders and victim protection services, but I found that I wasn't afraid. The woman who had terrorized me was no longer powerful. She was a convicted felon with a destroyed reputation, facing years of parole supervision and restitution payments. Meanwhile, I had rebuilt my life, strengthened my relationships, and found purpose in helping others avoid similar experiences. David was more concerned than I was. "Mom, what if she tries to contact us? What if she comes back to the house? Then we call the police and she goes back to prison for violating parole. She has no power over us anymore, David. We took that away from her when we stopped keeping her secrets." The support group I facilitated had grown to include over 40 regular members and had spawned similar groups in neighboring communities. We had successfully helped dozens of people recover stolen assets, escape abusive situations, and rebuild their lives. One of my proudest moments came when Catherine, the woman whose daughter had stolen her condo money, stood up at a meeting and announced that she had successfully sued for recovery of her assets and was moving into her own apartment. "I never thought I'd have my independence back," she said through tears. "But Margaret taught me that it's never too late to fight for yourself." On the 6th anniversary of Jessica's assault on me, I was sitting in my backyard reading when Emma, now 14, joined me on the porch swing. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Do you ever regret fighting back against Jessica? I mean, it caused a lot of pain for everyone." I considered her question carefully. This young woman was grappling with complex questions about justice, forgiveness, and family loyalty. "Emma, fighting back against Jessica didn't cause the pain. Jessica caused the pain when she chose to manipulate and abuse people who trusted her. Fighting back was how we stopped the pain and protected ourselves and future victims. But Dad was really hurt when he realized what she had done to him. Your father was hurt because someone he loved betrayed him. That pain was inevitable once he learned the truth. The only question was whether he would learn it in time to protect himself and you children, or whether he would discover it too late to do anything about it." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad you were brave enough to make her show who she really was." That evening, as I prepared for bed in my own house, surrounded by my own belongings, secure in relationships built on honesty and mutual respect, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The slap that had echoed through my living room 6 years ago had been the catalyst for the most important fight of my life. It had forced me to choose between the comfortable lies I had been accepting and the difficult truth I needed to face. From that choice had come pain, yes, but also liberation. I had learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. I had discovered that protecting someone from consequences doesn't help them grow. I had found that standing up for yourself, even when it's terrifying, can inspire others to find their own courage. Most importantly, I had learned that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity, your independence, and your right to be treated with respect. The woman who had been slapped for daring to invite a friend to her own home had become an advocate, a survivor, and a symbol of hope for others facing similar battles. 7 years later, I still facilitate support groups, still speak at conferences, still answer calls from desperate family members who don't know how to help elderly relatives escape abuse. The work continues because the need continues, but now I approach it with the confidence of someone who has fought the fight and won. The house on Maple Street in Detroit is quiet now, filled with the peaceful sounds of a family that has learned to value honesty over harmony, courage over comfort. Emma and Jake, now teenagers, bring their friends over regularly, proud of their grandmother who refuses to be anyone's victim. David has remarried, to a wonderful woman named Sarah who treats me with genuine respect and affection. She never tries to replace my role in the family or control my relationships with my grandchildren. She brings her own children into our blended family, and together we're creating something beautiful and authentic. Sometimes I think about Jessica, wondering if prison changed her or if she simply learned to be more careful about her manipulations. I hope she found genuine rehabilitation, but I don't need to know. My healing doesn't depend on her transformation. What I know for certain is that the day she slapped me was the day I stopped being a victim and started being a fighter. That fight saved not just my own life, but potentially the lives of countless others who have found courage in my story. The sting of her hand across my face lasted only moments. The strength I found in response to it has lasted years and will continue for whatever time I have left. That's the real victory, not just surviving abuse, but transforming it into a force for protecting others. As I write these words, I'm 77 years old, and I wake up each morning with energy and purpose. I have work to do, people to help, and a family that loves and respects me. The slap that was meant to silence me instead gave me my voice. The woman who tried to steal my home gave me a mission that has made my life richer and more meaningful than I ever imagined possible. And that, I've learned, is how you turn a moment of victimization into a lifetime of victory.